All right, welcome folks to another episode of Hashtag Finance. I'm your sometimes host, James Black, being joined by Fabrice Taylor here in Toronto at the top of First Canadian Place. Pleased to have you, Fabrice. I've been told that this is your first podcast after all the media that you've done over the years.
I know that's hard to believe. I've always wanted to do one, and I always wanted to wear these cool earphones like Joe Rogan wears. So I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, well, we won't go as long as Joe Rogan. His shows usually go on for a couple hours. Maybe we'll go for a couple dozen minutes today.
Sounds good.
We'll talk about who you are, your experience, and what we do on this podcast is we usually get into the minds of our guests. So we want to find out, because you are an investment professional, we want to know sort of your philosophy around investment, maybe some of your war wounds or stories from being on the front lines of micro cap and small cap investing.
Lots of those, yeah.
Yeah, and then we'll talk about the future and what that has in store for yourself and maybe those who follow you at Investors Club. So thanks for joining us. I know you came in from Edmonton to do some business here, and I'm always glad to talk to people from Edmonton because I know that they are built strong out there. It's a tough place to survive, and I applaud you. And I'm not going to ask this from a pejorative way, but why do you live in Edmonton? What has based you there when you do so much business in Toronto and Vancouver and wherever else?
Well, I'm from Edmonton. My family's there, and I lived here for probably 15 years, and I worked at the Globe and Mail. I went to school here, and then I worked on Bay Street, but my parents got old, and so I just moved back there. But I'm here all the time, once, twice a month, and you have to come here, but I actually like it. It's nice. I mean, Warren Buffett lives in Omaha, you know. Not that I'm Warren Buffett, but you don't need to live in New York City or Toronto to be in the thick of things.
No, you don't. And that sometimes has to be reminded to us folks who live out here because it's there's the center of the universe thing.
Actually,
right?
you know, it's funny you say that because the other advantage of living in what I call a hinterland city, like a Quebec City or a Winnipeg or even a Regina, Edmonton, is there's no competition. So there's great companies there. Mm-hmm. It's all pro rata the population, right? But there's no investment bankers there. There's no analysts there. So I tend to find some really good ideas in these hinterland cities, and I'll often look in those cities just geographically and pick companies that are based there because they generally don't get a lot of attention, so they don't trade for high multiples.
Unpolished gems, so to speak.
Something like that.
Yeah. So you are the founder of President's Club, which is an investment newsletter.
Correct. How
long have you been publishing that?
Well, it really was an offshoot of a column I wrote in the Globe and Mail starting in 2000. Built up pretty good readership, good following. I left the Globe as an employee in 2003, and I went to work on the sell side and then on the buy side. But I continued to write as a freelancer because they liked me and I liked them, and I liked the profile that it gave me.
Right.
You know, when you write for the Globe, people return your calls, and then we decided. I asked them, well, why don't we carve this out and make it a paid for item as opposed to just giving it away for free.
Right.
And that's where the idea started. That was 2011. So 8 years now.
Right. So I'm interested because in the media, I see the newspapers trying to monetize their content because obviously advertisement has dropped dramatically since the digital age of news. And now you see a lot of publications like the Globe and Mail, which have a paid for cannabis newsletter. Tell me, where's the bifurcation between free and paid? Where does the value on the paid side, and what does that look like? And what do they have to do to warrant that subscription? Because I'm still trying to figure out what it is. You know, in the old days, I go on the website, get the news for free, and now they want to charge me for certain gateways into certain content.
Yeah.
What am I getting that's so special on those?
Well, I think that if, let's say you like political news, some people are political junkies. It's hard to prove that you have the best political news, isn't it? Like, can the Globe say we're so much better than the CBC? I mean, they both have lots of reporters, and it's difficult to gauge it because there's no objective standard. But when it comes to finance, there is one. It's called How Much Money Did You Make Me? So I think that's one way they can do it. That's why investing is an easy carve out for a newspaper.
Right.
I don't know what I've never read their cannabis newsletter, so I don't know if they're taking stocks in there, but certainly even if they're not, being a niche publication focused on just that, because investors are dying for information about that space in particular because it's so new, it's so big, it's always changing. And let's face it, there's a lot of shenanigans that go on in there. So you can make a name for yourself as a journalist or analyst by aggressively taking a look at. I mean, I've called out some of these cannabis companies myself in the Globe and on PNN.
Yeah.
And it's not that hard, sadly. It's almost easier to find, what's the right word, people of suspect character than winners, especially these days when valuations are so out of control. So you can add value that way as well. But look, I wouldn't want to own a newspaper. I'll tell you that much. It's a tough business.
It's a tough business for sure. And again, it's sort of back to our philosophy where we work at CSE, where, you can create your audience and find your audience online. And through digital content, you can be more engaging and own the message and the conversation.
Absolutely. What's happened to newspapers? I mean, they used to be these dominant little monopolies. Every town had one or two. And if you wanted to sell something, you had to use the classified. And I'm old enough to remember looking at classified ads and buying classified ads, and they were really expensive.
Yeah.
And then the way they filled the space between ads was content. They had writers who all thought they were, God's gift to whatever they were writing about.
Sure.
And then with the internet, people found out, I don't need to read, so-and-so in the Toronto Star for film reviews. There are better film reviews out there for free that are much more, intelligent or easy to read or well-written. And that applied across the board. And newspaper journalists, I think, they're the most depressed people in the history of civilization now, because it's been very difficult for them. It's been really hard to realize, I'm not that special, am I? I'm really not. And their pay has reflected that. And everyone else, anyone, as you say, can go out and give a message, and they control the message. Obviously, we all know that journalists don't always get it right, and they tend to have an incentive to torque up their stories. And so now controlling the message, I think that's very valuable, and I think it's very good for business. It's good for democracy. It's good for investors. It's good for everything.
Yeah. And deadlines, too, I've noticed, always push sometimes stories out before they're fully baked,
That's very much true. Well, you know what they say, journalism is the first draft of history, and the next story is the second draft. Eventually they get it right, or some history book writer gets it right. But look, I like the way the world has evolved. I think it's good for everybody.
Yeah, so how do you involve, so let's talk about your newsletter and how that works. So I assume you have a subscriber base.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how many people, but you
About
have
8,000.
Okay. And how often do you feed them information?
Well, I don't write as much anymore for a number of reasons. I mean, I stopped publishing for 18 months for a few reasons. Number one, I sensed that the marijuana story, the narrative, was going to take over everyone's imagination. And I've done very well in weed stocks, but not because I'm smart, because I get invited to a lot of these things very early.
Yeah.
And I certainly wasn't going to recommend them. First of all, most of them aren't worth half of what they trade for. Some are, but most of them are not. And secondly, it's hard to recommend something when you're in at, 15 cents and it goes public at $2. And so I just didn't. I knew everybody wanted to hear about weed. I didn't want to be that person who says, hey, close your eyes and buy this one and just hope. And it's worked out, by the way. Like, I mean, if you had told me to buy Canopy, I was in Tweed, which became Canopy, at 40 cents before it went public. And if you had told me, I sold it all the day it started trading for 10 times what I invested. And I thought I was, wow, lucky, genius, whatever you want to call it. If you had told me to buy it, that day at $4, I'd have said, are you crazy? Oh, look, it's overvalued at $4. It went to 60, maybe 7, I don't remember.
Yeah.
So you can't underestimate the exuberance of investors when they think there's a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. There isn't in this case, but nonetheless. So that, I think the bloom's coming off that rose a little bit. I mean, I think what you're going to get now is you're going to get a shakeout.
There is a maturation of the cannabis industry. It's facing some reality, and we saw it maybe last week with what happened with Bruce and Canopy and the transition.
I mean, Bruce did a great job.
Yeah.
He did a fantastic job. And I've never seen a CEO, look so gleeful to get fired. I mean, he went on every show and talked about getting fired. And I think I know why, because guess what he can do now that he's not an insider anymore? He can sell his stock. And I'm sure, I don't want to speak for Bruce, but I hope he's selling some stock, at least taking some money off the table, because even Canopy is very overvalued, losing $300, $400 million per quarter in some cases. Look, I also think that people, like the average investor out there, and it's sad because a lot of investors started investing in weed. They'd never invested in anything. What we took in Canada was a bunch of guys who were mining guys, and that dried up. So guess what? They became weed guys. but they're really not weed guys. They're mining guys. And so
there was no such thing as a weed guy though before.
Right.
So like you had,
I mean, you had to be a weed guy. You had to know public markets, but it's agriculture, right? And then it's packaging, and it's a
lot of regulatory navigation too.
Exactly, compliance. And these guys weren't equipped for that. And they're raising so much money, and they're arbitraging. I mean, I knew people I heard of a group that bought a pig farm in Abbotsford, BC, or somewhere around there for $350,000 and arbitraged that into $100 million market cap as a weed stock. But there's really nothing there except a pig farm. They didn't even have a license. So if you're an investor out there and you don't understand this, you're like, as Warren Buffett said, there's a fool at every poker table, and if you don't know who it is, it's you. If you don't understand this stuff, this arbitrage, you can't create $100 million out of $400,000. It's not possible. And they did it, and it can't last. So they're blowing up.
It's alchemy, right? It's alchemy. It's
some kind of financial alchemy, but it's not real.
Yeah.
It's it's powder. It just doesn't last. So, and now we're starting to see that, and it's not over. But having said that, there are some gems out there.
Absolutely.
There are some companies, and I think what you want to look for is a company that's very focused, very niche oriented, and that has management that really believes in what they're doing and is focused.
Right.
If you can find them, they can make some money.
Okay, we're going to dig into that topic a bit more just after the break. We'll be right back.
Broadcasting from the heart of Toronto's financial district at the top of First Canadian Place, CSE TV is your trusted source for what's happening in capital markets. Our #Finance podcast series gets you exclusive long-form interview content with visionary entrepreneurs and CEOs of companies in the news. The CSE's On the Street segments get you up close and personal with many of our listed companies. And don't forget that you can find the video version of this and all our media on our CSE TV channel on YouTube. For instant notifications, subscribe to CSE TV now.
And we're back with Fabrice, and we're talking about the telltale signs of let's say, an investment with potential. So if we use as an example in the cannabis space, there's been probably an inordinate amount of companies that have I guess they've been, for lack of a better term, lucky, or they've caught a good market and they've been able to outperform the fundamentals of what you typically have to do. So we go back to the late 90s, early 2000s, we look at the tech bubble, and you see some of the trends that happen there where people would look at basically the typical paper napkin deal. Now we're looking at public markets. There's more disclosure. That's sort of been the good side of this. But we're seeing basic fundamentals not apply in valuation. So you mentioned Canopy and the huge losses that they had and how that's still tied to a market value of over $20 billion. How does that, work without some sort of sensationalism or appetite in the market for a high level of risk? So let's get back to your philosophy. You're trying to put your lists of investors and yourself into things that have, it sounds like you follow Warren Buffett and fundamental investment and that philosophy a little bit. Am I on the right track? Or?
Sort of. I mean, my favorite kind of stock is what I call a turnaround situation where it's an old company. There's 5 boxes typically. It's an old company doing something boring. There's 2 of them. An old, public for a long time. So I have 10 years or so of financial records that I can look at. So I can make sure that my assumptions aren't stupid. Mm-hmm. So if I assume they can do 5% EBITDA margins, I can go back for 10 years and make sure that they've actually done that or close to that. Boring company, because boring companies never disappear. Tech companies disappear. Do you remember MySpace or Friendster?
Absolutely, yeah.
They both got crushed by Facebook. That's tech for you. Very difficult. So I don't like that. I like boring things like gravel companies and companies that make plastic and airlines, that kind of thing. I like lots of debt, because debt, while it does a lot of damage on the way down, it does the opposite when things turn around. And we get improvements. A small improvement when you're heavily indebted moves the needle a lot on the stock price.
Right.
Okay? Just as a small deterioration in the business with lots of debt drives the stock price. It turbo drives the loss. The opposite holds true of when things turn. And I like a stock that's hitting a 52-week high for the first time in a long time, because the market is smarter than I am, and that's the market telling me I'm right about it. So you look for those things, and you can get the kind of returns if you do it right that people dream of in the junior market with way less risk.
Right.
I mean, everyone dreams of a 10 bagger or a 20 bagger, and they do happen in the junior markets, but they're rare, they're often fleeting, and you have to be in early. By the time the average Joe has heard about it, it's too late.
Let me get this straight. You like looking at stuff that's already listed with a history trading?
That's my favorite.
Buying in the
bucket.
secondary market. Okay.
That's my favorite bucket. I mean, when it comes to financing companies, obviously there you want a cool idea. One thing that a lot of these entrepreneurs don't understand is promotion.
Mm-hmm.
Some people think it's a dirty word. I don't. You have to promote yourself because you're competing for dollars that could go anywhere. They could go into a GIC, an ETF, a blue chip, or another microcap.
Yeah.
And so this idea that a lot of these entrepreneurs have is, I'm just so special, people will come and find me out. You're dreaming. You're going to suffer, and that's all about cost of capital. You're going to be paying a lot of money for your equity, and your shareholders are going to suffer. And it drives me crazy when I can't convince a board or a management team, get out and hit the road, pay for some flights, go to a conference, or get someone to talk about you.
So in today's day and age, the typical roadshow back in the, when I was doing IR was, you go across the country, you invite a bunch of IAs to a hotel or a nice restaurant, you put up the PowerPoint, you talk to them, and then you answer a few questions. And, if you're doing a financing, I guess there's a subscription form. But does that still work? I mean, I know that there's the grit and grind of going out there and just raising awareness, because you said there's a lot of noise.
Yeah.
But what about, again, we talk about digital and content and engagement and all this stuff. Does bringing a shareholder into a deal or into a company to buy that stock require a different set of tools now or a different technique?
That's a really good question. And I think it can work and it can also not work. And it really depends on a number of things. How good is your story? If you can't surprise people, if you invite a bunch of brokers to lunch and they get there and they're like, blah, I'm bored, this is predictable.
You got to understand, half the room's full of guys who just want a free lunch. So now you got another
sandwich is cold. Yeah. But if you walk into that room, and it doesn't have to be a lunch, but it can go, I've done these things with companies that I'm involved with, I've just accompanied them. And if you walk in there and they're like, wow, like that's a story, you'll see the buying. Yeah. You'll see the volume tick up. You'll see the price tick up. So there's no point in promoting garbage. I mean, garbage does get promoted, as you know, and they spend big dollars. A lot of weed companies have spent a lot of money promoting. Yeah. And they're promoting to the lowest common denominator in terms of intellect, right? Let's be honest about it. But they're spending millions of dollars doing it because their plan is not necessarily to build a business; it's to just blow out their stock. Let's be honest about it. It's taking the mentality of the next trade versus the long term. Exactly. And again, the market, when you have a bit of both working at the same time, you maybe have some liquidity generated, and that does help everybody. But at the same time, like you said, there's a lot of damage that can happen when you. And if you're smart, there's nothing wrong with that. That's just life.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's never going to change. But if you're an investor, you need to understand this, and then you need to be ready to. You watch those insiders, or you watch what's happening, and get in, get out.
Yeah. When's the jump off point?
Yeah. Like everyone seems to think that they're buying Coca-Cola in 1890. You're not. The odds are that one in 1,000 junior companies makes it. And that's just the law of the jungle. There's nothing wrong with that. That's entrepreneurship. That's capitalism. But there's nothing wrong with taking profits either. If you put 10 grand into a deal, into a stock, and the stock doubles on you, the wrong thing to do is go buy more. If it's that kind of stock, right? Yeah. You sell half. Now you've got no risk. You've got all your capital back, and you can't lose. And that's the smartest thing you can do. And then if it goes up, maybe take a little more off the table. Goes down, you don't worry about it. But I see too many small investors who don't do that.
Right.
And it costs them. And it's not good for the market. It's not good for the exchanges because they get fed up and they feel, I don't understand this, so I'm never going to invest again. So understand how the business really works. And the juniors is very different than the bigger companies, okay? It's totally different. It's like apples and oranges. Just understand that and you'll do much better and you'll save yourself a lot of money.
How much more weight do you put in a small or micro cap company on the person running the company versus a larger company which has a CEO who's more of a stakeholder, reports to a larger board that has more infrastructure from a internal control perspective and from a strategic perspective? These smaller companies are typically ego-driven or run by one or two individuals that hold a lot of the rein.
Yeah.
How important is it for someone to factor in how equipped that person is to run a company or execute on a vision?
Well, let's use the best example of a big company would be a bank. And banks run themselves. They don't really, like a bank CEO might make seriously 2 decisions a year, right? And then he's got to go to his board. His board's going to be tough. These aren't pushovers. These aren't his buddies. These are people who run other businesses and who may be customers of that bank and large customers. So he's got to sell that idea. Unfortunately, they usually do, and they're usually wrong, because how many new ideas has a bank had that's actually worked? And then let's take the opposite example and go down to a very small micro cap. Typically, the CEO is the entrepreneur. It's his idea. The board's stacked with his buddies or just nobodies who are just there for the stipend. And he doesn't want a board that challenges him. He wants a bunch of yes people, because he does have a huge ego, and he needs to have a huge ego. That can be good in the sense that you have to have a big ego to be a CEO, because it's tough.
Oh, you got to have complete blinders on, like almost a lack of awareness of reality sometimes. Yeah.
Because it's just easy to get down. And one of the things about entrepreneurs or successful ones is they never get down, or rarely. And so you don't want them surrounded by a bunch of naysayers. And I think that's okay, because at that point, the board's there for advice. Maybe you should think about this, and you should have a board that's kind of like, this guy's a lawyer, this guy knows the markets, this guy's an industry guy. But as we saw with Bruce Linton, there comes a point, if you are successful, where the entrepreneur has to exit. It's very rare that an entrepreneur can graduate into being a manager.
Yeah, they're unemployable, basically.
Yeah, they're not, and they don't like to be employees. They want to be entrepreneurs. I'm sure Bruce is already running around looking for his next idea if he hasn't started already. So
I'm sure, yeah.
It's very different, is the bottom line, I think, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that dichotomy, because it makes sense.
I like this focus on entrepreneurship and entrepreneurs, so we'll go a little deeper. I just want to ask, when you just say you're in your hypothetical office, I don't know if you have an office where you sit behind a big desk and people come in.
I just lie on my settee all day in my underwear.
Perfect. So someone's Skype calling you or whatever, and you've got entrepreneur A and entrepreneur B. A is the one that you are going to invest in, and B is the one that almost like 3 minutes in the conversation, you absolutely just turn the button off. Entrepreneur A, what are the telltale signs of someone characteristically that give you at least the door opener to say, wow, okay, there's some of the right traits here that give me some confidence that this could be worth writing a check? Yeah. What are some of the traits that you tend to see? You mentioned a few already, but...
Yeah, I'll repeat one. Does he surprise me?
Yeah.
Do I say, oh, wow, that's a really good idea, I never thought of that, and that makes a lot of sense.
What's an example of a surprise that was given to you?
Well, I'll tell you, 6 years ago, 6.5, I got a call from one of my subscribers who runs a little fund in Kelowna. And he said, I met this guy. You got to meet him. He's got this great idea, but he needs money. I said, okay. I called the guy up. What are you doing? He says, I'm fixing people's credit. And I said, oh, okay. And that I understood, because I know how Canadians in particular are indebted and how they live check to check and don't tend to save a lot, and how important credit is, because if you don't have a credit card or access to credit in society, you're done. You can't do anything. You can't book a hotel room. You can't get on a plane. You can't buy anything, really. And he explained to me that he was creating these loans. He would lend, in quote marks, his customer money. And as that customer paid it back, he'd report those payments to Equifax or TransUnion, and he'd improve the score, all else equal. And I said, well, why would you lend someone with bad credit money? He goes, well, I don't actually give him the money. I keep it in trust. So when I pay that guy the money, the $3,000 that I lent him, plus the $500 fee I took and the interest, I'm just giving him his money back. And I was like, wow. So, that was a surprise.
And they work off of basically a prepaid credit card.
Similar to that.
In a way, yeah. I think I know the company.
Like a reverse mortgage.
Yeah,
okay?
Yeah.
And so we built that company privately, and 3.5 years later, I exited, and it was the biggest exit of my life, easily.
Nice.
So that's an example. And he was my former partner, was, to just carry on the narrative, he was also very focused, laser focused on what he wanted to do. He answered every question. Like, what you want to do when you're an analyst looking at a new idea is try and punch holes in the guy's optimism and his rosy, sort of view of things. And if it's hard to do that, you're onto something. And then I'll typically shop it around, talk to other people. What do you think about this? Because I've made the mistake of just relying on myself. Maybe my ego is too big. And so now I have a big Rolodex. I just call people and say, listen, I'm thinking about writing a check into this. What do you think? And would you do it with me? Because you know more about this than I do.
Yep.
So that helps a lot as well.
Yeah, because you're going to have bias. You're going to be anchored into certain ways of thinking that have worked in the past but are not replicable again.
Exactly.
And be myopic, yeah.
I think being surprised, and that comes from my journalism background. I remember when I started the Globe and Mail in 1995, the managing editor took us summer students aside and he said, listen, you got one job, and your job is to surprise people.
Right.
That's it. So
where do you feel that feeling? In your gut? Or is it more of intellectual exercise?
I think it's more in your head.
Yeah.
It's like, it's just this pleasant, like, wow, I never thought about that, or I didn't know that, and that's really interesting. And journalism has been great for me because it teaches you, that I learned this idea of being surprised. It's such an elegant way to put it, like just surprise people. And also how to dig, how to pick up the phone and get the answers you need, not just like too many, CFA type analysts. They get their CFA, they think, oh, I don't have to work anymore. I just Google everything and build a spreadsheet. It's never going to
model. Yeah.
I'll model it, and it's garbage in, garbage out. And anyone can Google. You have to have an edge, and to get an edge, you have to find that one source or two sources, get them on the phone, because you're not going to get an edge reading something that's free for everyone to read, right? That's not an edge. So you can't be afraid of the phone, and you have to network, and you have to be able to find people. And I've been blessed. I mean, it's not my first rodeo. I've been around for doing this for 25 years, so fortunately, I've got a pretty good Rolodex. It always gets better. But yeah, I think those two things that I picked up from my days in journalism have helped me a lot. Nice.
No, those are great tips. Now, what is, to kind of close off this point, one of the or two of the telltale signs of someone who comes to you? And this is advice you can give to the entrepreneurs listening or the investors. What are the one or two deal killers or deal, not even killers, not even getting starters, we'll call them, they're just the non-starters for you when you come across someone, they're looking for money to sell you an idea and you just go, you just did that. I mean, I'm out. Almost like a Shark Tank thing where you just go, no.
Well, there's so many to choose from. I mean, I would say that if an entrepreneur comes to me and, like I'm still getting a lot of weed pitches.
Yeah.
And I just feel like saying, do you actually pay attention to what's happening in the world? Like, and there's nothing special about your idea. You're just latching onto a theme. You're not really talking from your heart. This is not something that you feel passionately about or strongly about. This is just you trying to figure out how to make a buck. Mm-hmm. I think that kind of, what's the word for it? It's disingenuous. It's insincere. It's not coming from the right place. It's just like, and then people have made money doing this, but they haven't made other people money, or not a lot of other people. They make themselves money maybe, but I think that's number one. I want to know that the person feels very strongly about what the project that they want to undertake, and that they want to choose their partners carefully because they care about it. Right.
No, and in the skin in the game aspect of they've psychologically committed themselves to this idea, this vision.
To a 10-year journey too, because it doesn't happen overnight.
No,
it takes about 10 years to build a company up.
Yeah, and I mean, we don't have time to go into, sort of blockchain and sort of some of the crazy things we probably saw about a year and a half, 2 years ago almost now with people turning mining businesses into blockchain businesses. We're talking about like picks and shovels mining.
And calling them mining, yeah.
Yeah, and just sort of the ways people would contort their businesses into something because it was a headline grabber, right?
And it's interesting. Somebody said to me once, a guy I know, I didn't know him well, and he was kind of more savvy about the junior markets than me. I wasn't that. This is like 6 years ago or so, and I wasn't that familiar with them. He said, come and meet this guy. He wants to talk to you. So I go and meet him, and he wanted to do a weed deal. And after 30 minutes, I kind of nudged the guy, and I said, let's go. And we left, and I said, that was the worst meeting I've ever heard. That was the worst pitch, the stupidest idea. The guy doesn't know what he's talking about. He has no focus. He can't answer any questions. And I was like, please don't waste my time again. He said, no. Just relax. He says, sometimes you make the most money on the worst deals. And I rolled my eyes because, I come from an analytical background. It didn't make sense to me. Anyway, he talked me into investing in this company. I think I invested at 5 cents. And not a huge amount of money, like 25 grand. The stock went to $4.
Oh, God.
And I never recommended it or anything. I just watched this in awe.
Yeah.
Of course, I sold it at like $1, thinking this is overvalued. It went to $4. Still, it was a nice pass. And there is some truth to that, sadly. Sometimes the worst ideas are the best, but it's not advice for the average Joe because you're not getting in at 5 cents. You're going to hear about it when it's 50 or at 75.
What aspect of the bad idea, though, is driving that price up?
I think it's basically it's more promotion than substance.
Understood. Okay.
And the guy's a good promoter, but not a good operator, and maybe not particularly interested. You know, there's a lot of guys who just put stuff together. You know this. And
of course, we see it. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's part of life. And that's okay. And I've been, fortunate to be, to go along for the ride on them. And I don't complain about it. But it was an interesting lesson to me because I thought this is too easy. You can't make this kind of money by just showing up for coffee. You have to work at it, But sometimes you don't have to. But you have to be in the privileged set, I think, of people who get that first phone call.
Yeah, no, I've seen that play out a few times. So, okay, well, look, I only have one more really pressing question, which is the other week we did a podcast that had nothing to do about finance. It was all about food and business lunches and where to get a good meal. And I used to live in St. Albert, north of Edmonton. Nice spot. But I am speaking from experience when I ask you, why do you live in Edmonton? And I'm not from there, so your answer is totally cool. But we were talking about food, and we talked about where to get lunch in Calgary and Vancouver and Toronto and sort of Montreal. But I actually don't know where to get a good lunch in Edmonton. And you got to tell me when I come out there and we grab lunch, where are we going?
We're going to go to Uccellino.
Okay.
It's a wonderful little Italian restaurant that specializes in northern Italian food. Just a nice room, great servers who know their stuff, wonderful wine list, and it's right on Jasper Ave, right downtown.
Right.
So I'll take you there, and I think you'll like it.
Okay, perfect. And I know Jasper has changed tremendously since I was last there 12, 13 years ago. So
you probably wouldn't recognize it.
No, probably not. Okay, and since you have the microphone in front of you, tell the listeners and the viewers, where can they learn more about what you're doing, get your content?
Yeah, so just go to www.thepresidentsclub.ca.
Mm-hmm.
It's currently free because I started publishing again. I feel like I got a couple of big wins under my belt before I started charging. So it's all free, and we post our stuff up there. I'm not publishing a lot, but so far the 2 ideas I've come up with since I started publishing have been pretty good winners, and I've got a couple more in the hopper that I'm working on. So yeah, come along and join me. And I'm always interested in, I like having a big group because I get a lot of really great ideas from my subscribers. I know a lot of them well. I've got farmers, accountants, everything, cops, and I get some good feedback from them either on stuff that I've written or ideas. Hey, have a look at this. So if you have an idea, then feel free to sign up, shoot me an email, and I'll be sure to look into it.
Cool. Well, thanks, Fabrice. Thanks for making us your first podcast. Hopefully not your last.
Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah, we'll see you next time you come in. We'll get into more details, maybe on some particular deals or stuff you're working on. But really enjoyed the chat. And once again, thanks for joining us.
So did I. Thanks, James.
Thanks.
Hi, it's Grace from the CSC reminding you to make sure to follow us on social media for the latest updates on our listed companies as well as new listing alerts. For more in-depth content, be sure to pick up our free quarterly magazine, Public Entrepreneur, available online at thecsc.com.